Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. The Justice Department orders Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to turn over a number of key records as their investigation into federal obstruction charges ramps up. Targeting Somali fraudsters, lawmakers on Capitol Hill introduce a new scam act which would allow the U.S. government to denaturalize and deport legal immigrants who are convicted of certain crimes. And the FBI is now officially looking into claims that a number of Minnesota Democrats actually received significant political contributions from donors, all tied to their state's staggering fraud scandal. Also, the Trump administration sells its first batch of Venezuelan oil. We'll tell you how much they scored from the epic deal, and proving once again that he's on another planet altogether. A legendary starship captain breaks the mold by chowing down on a bowl of crunchy cereal while driving his car all over Hollywood, California. All this and a bunch more, it's coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with this. The Justice Department is rapidly intensifying their investigation of this fella, Governor Tim Walz, and his fellow Minnesota Democrats for allegedly obstructing federal immigration efforts in their state, and they're now taking it to an entirely new level. I've been telling you about this. I knew this would happen. Federal prosecutors have just served a number of legally binding grand jury subpoenas to Walz and his cronies, ordering them all to hand over important records which are vital to the government's case against them. No, Editor Pranov, not Lawrence Welk records. Different records altogether. Get rid of that. The requested documents reportedly include all records and communications which have been issued this year concerning federal immigration enforcement in Minnesota, including any directives issued to state residents regarding their interactions with ICE agents. According to reports, the subpoenaed records potentially reveal proof of an actual conspiracy regarding coordinated efforts by the governor, the mayor of Minneapolis, and a bunch of other state Democrats, all to impede federal law enforcement operations throughout the entire Twin Cities area. Additionally, the feds are reportedly looking into charges against Walz and the others, which are similar to the ones used to prosecute some of the people who stormed the U.S. Capitol January 6, 2021. We all remember that day. For his part, an indignant Walz says that he has indeed received the subpoena, that his state will not be dragged into what he calls political theater, and that the investigation has nothing at all to do with justice and everything to do with creating a partisan distraction. He also says that fed-up Minnesotans are more concerned with safety and peace than they are with a bunch of baseless legal tactics which are aimed directly at public servants who are standing shoulder to shoulder with their community. So, the other offices which receive subpoenas include those of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, State Attorney General Keith Ellison, and more. And Frey says there's reason to be concerned. He claims that when the federal government weaponizes its power to try and intimidate local leaders who are simply doing their jobs, every American should be worried. I'm worried that this guy's still the mayor. Attorney General Ellison is chiming in as well. He claims that rather than investigate the tragic killing of activist Renee Good, President Trump is instead weaponizing the justice system against any leader who dares to stand up to him. In the meantime, it remains to be seen whether or not the Justice Department will eventually unearth enough substantial evidence to secure any indictments in the case. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. And here's the way it all pans out. When people in positions of power think they're the brightest bananas in the bunch, there's always somebody standing by who's just this much brighter. And that's bad news for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and a bunch of his pals. On the other hand, these subpoenas, if you think about it, kind of a gift in disguise for Minnesota leadership, and more on that in just a bit. Now, unfortunately, it's not the weekend, so we can't call this a subpoena Saturday, but we'll take what we can get. Now, just open your eyes a little bit. Look around. In my view, everyone in Minnesota, the governor, the little French fella, Mayor Frey, disgraced congressperson Ilhan Omar. That was an honest mistake. And others, they've tried to hamper the efforts of ICE agents in their mission, which is to find, detain, and deport illegal immigrants. They've called federal agents an occupying force and lawless. They can clearly see a number of ICE agents right now being targeted, protests in the streets, a church being invaded over the weekend. You saw the video. People have been seriously injured, and in fact, one person has already been killed. Have Walz and his comrades obstructed or impeded law enforcement? Come on, do the basic math, and the answer is going to come to you real quick. You won't even need one of those decades-old solar-powered calculators that Radio Shack used to give away for free. And one last note, these subpoenas, they're a gift to the governor and others because now the narrative has changed from billions of dollars worth of fraud and corruption, which right now I'm not talking about. They've changed that to simple obstruction. Well played, Governor Walz. Maybe he is the brightest one in the room. He's kind of wagging the dog. Stick with a bit of a related topic now and turn our attention to Capitol Hill, where Republican lawmakers are hard at work on a new law which would allow the federal government to denaturalize and deport legal immigrants who came to our country and they eventually commit fraud. As a direct result of the staggering number of Somali fraudsters in his state, Minnesota Congressman Tom Emmer now advancing a bill called the Stop Citizen Abuse and Misrepresentation or Scam Act in the House of Representatives. That's a mouthful. If it passes, the measure would allow the government to revoke the citizenship of any immigrant who was convicted of fraud against American taxpayers within 10 years of initially becoming a citizen. Additionally, the bill would allow the government to eventually deport any immigrant who was found guilty within a decade of committing espionage, an aggravated felony, or who was affiliated in any way with a foreign terrorist organization. Get rid of them. Emmer says that, in his opinion, I think mine as well, anyone who's committed any of these crimes simply hasn't met our country's basic requirements for being a citizen in the first place. He also says this type of measure, long overdue, that it finally holds Somali fraudsters in Minnesota accountable for their schemes, and that it's time to send them packing, send them home. In the meantime, a nearly identical Scam Act bill also working its way through the Senate as well, with the lawmaker who's promoting it on that side of the building saying the rampant fraud in Minnesota has served as a real wake-up call, and that immigrants who commit those types of crimes, they don't deserve the great honor of American citizenship in the first place. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the deal. They're really hard to come by. They're highly coveted, and we don't issue them on a regular basis. But this is a special occasion. So a big News Roundup pat on the back, and way to go to Representative Tom Emmer. I like that guy. He's a common-sense government official who's watching the back of every law-abiding, hard-working, tax-paying U.S. citizen like you and I and doing what needs to be done. You know, here in the States, far too easy for people to come in from any corner of the planet, figure the system out, create ways to rig the game, and make everybody else suffer in the process. Now, look, here in America, we welcome anybody, everybody, provided they come here lawfully and live, work, and play by the rules, just like you and I do, just like everybody does. When President Trump squared away trade deals with a number of countries all over the world, he put everybody on notice that the U.S. will no longer be a global punching bag. And now Congressman Tom Emmer, he's doing something very similar. It's all rather basic. For those who are here legally right now participating in certain crimes, get your citizenship revoked, you'll get a swift kick in the pants, and you'll be promptly booted out of paradise. Put another way, for every Somali fraudster in Minnesota, this is not going to pan out well for you, and it will soon become your very worst nightmare. Turning now to some breaking developments from Minnesota concerning convicted Somali fraudsters, their alleged political donations to Democratic candidates, and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar herself. She's my little delightful bucket of sunshine. According to new reports, the FBI is now actively investigating a number of political campaigns in the North Star State and looking into whether or not they illegally profited from the massive amount of Somali welfare schemes which have rattled that state to its core. Officials say the Justice Department urged the FBI to act following earlier reports which linked Governor Tim Walz, Representative Ilhan Omar, again, my little Miss Sunshine, and several additional state Democrats to campaign contributions from convicted fraudsters, as well as other community care providers linked to similar scams. They go on to say that right now, the public corruption section of the FBI is in the process of following the money trail to see if the cash was obtained illegally through one of Minnesota's fraudulent food assistance or home health care schemes before landing in a candidate's lap. Like they say, just keep following that money trail. They also reveal that the probe is just now kicking into high gear and that so far, federal investigators have not yet been able to find any evidence of wrongdoing by the campaigns. In any case, according to state records, campaign donations from fraudsters directly linked to Minnesota's colossal public benefit scams have already wound up in the hands of Governor Walz, Representative Omar, and a Somali American state senator, a guy named Omar Fateh. You know that guy. In particular, Walz received more than $8,000 from a handful of people who were eventually connected to the fraud investigations, while Omar herself took in more than $5,000 in cash from a couple of other alleged Somali scammers. However, it's worth pointing out that most of the questionable cash, it was eventually surrendered by the candidates and donated to charity. Got to be fair. A final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. It's kind of like one of those puzzles. It says right there on the side of the box, for ages 3 to adults. That's exactly how easy this puzzle is to piece together. I'll tell you, a blindfolded toddler could easily figure this one out. Now, if you're a Minnesota resident, this should have you abundantly concerned, and you should be demanding not only accountability, but the way I see it, a change in state leadership as well. At this point, all of Minnesota, and perhaps the entire country, they know full well who this Tim Walz character is, and Ilhan Omar has done nothing short of making a spectacle of herself on the regional and the national stage. Now to rub some salt on a painful and festering wound, these two upstanding leaders and some additional Democrats are being investigated because they may have had their campaigns partially financed by folks who have participated in fraud scams right there in Minnesota. America, what more do you need? Walz, Omar, and others being closely scrutinized by the Justice Department, the FBI, and even the President of the United States of America. The trail of corruption tragically easy to follow. And it all reminds me of something the great tabloid writer William Shakespeare so eloquently penned many years ago in a thing called the Denmark Enquirer. His exact quote, if I remember correctly, he said, "Something is wrong in the state of Minnesota." All right, switching things up just a bit now and shifting our focus to the World Economic Forum, this time in Switzerland, where communist China now aiming to position itself as a legitimate alternative to the global leadership of the USA. As President Trump makes waves with his desire to take over Greenland, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to pry apart the West by absurdly claiming that, unlike our country, they consistently act with the good of the entire planet in mind. Well, it's kind of a head-scratcher. There are some who say that China actually invented and widely distributed the COVID bug to the whole world. So not sure their claim is 100% legit. During a low-level speech at the forum, one Chinese official actually had the audacity to say that the communist regime always promotes a global community, a shared future, and free trade as well. That guy deserves a Best Actor award if he actually said that with a straight face. And the Oscars are coming up in a couple of months. Also, ridiculously claims that the CCP consistently focuses their efforts on cooperation over confrontation. Not true. And that right now, only China is providing legitimate solutions to the problems of the entire world. That guy's so delusional, he could actually become Minnesota's next governor. Now, some additional headlines we're also keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, only weeks after capturing dictator Nicolas Maduro in a daring raid, the Trump administration has just completed their first sale of Venezuelan oil in the global marketplace. That deal reportedly worth a staggering, check this out, $500 million. Moving along, President Trump, he is pulling back on threats to take Greenland by force, dropping his proposed tariffs against our European allies and announcing that a framework deal is currently in the works with NATO regarding defense of the strategic Arctic island. And our neighbor to the north is weighing in as well, calling Russia the greatest threat to Arctic security. Canada's president now promising to spend billions of dollars to fortify his country's northern border. And for the time being, due to the increasing concerns regarding the U.S., they've already spent nearly $1 billion to beef up security at their southern border as well. Now, a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news because I love showbiz news, and I think you do as well. And we'll kick things off today with a legendary Star Trek character who's still boldly going where no man has gone before. This guy's pushing 100 years old. William Shatner, better known to fans everywhere as the one and only Captain James T. Kirk of the USS Enterprise, apparently driving all over Hollywood, California, while munching on a bowl of his favorite cereal. Come on, man, focus on the road. First off, William Shatner, he is a global icon, rich and famous. I think he's 94 now, and I'm sure he could have ponied up some dough and called an Uber or a Lyft or a local taxi service. Second, sipping on a cup of coffee or maybe taking a bite out of an Egg McMuffin, that might be okay, but woofing down a bowl of Fruit Loops while cruising around L.A.'s San Fernando Valley, that will not aid you in your mission to live long and prosper. Also in Tinseltown, since we're in town already, the entire film industry is abuzz following the release of the highly anticipated Razzie Award nominations for Worst Movie of the Year. A lot of competition. Among this year's nominees, Disney's live-action Snow White, a dismal remake of War of the Worlds, some Netflix sci-fi dud called The Electric State, and a whole bunch more. The annual awards show hands out a number of dubious acting honors as well, and all the big winners, or if you prefer losers, receive their coveted trophies on the night before the big Academy Awards. I like the Razzies. They're kind of like the Oscars, but maybe just a bit more prestigious. Anybody's guess as to who's going to walk away with the big award, the grand prize this year, but hey, whoever wins is going to be in great company. Previous Worst Picture Awards have been handed out for Geely, starring Ben Affleck, Battlefield Earth, starring that guy, John Travolta, and my favorite movie of all time, Xanadu, starring the fabulous Olivia Newton-John and that dancing machine, Gene Kelly. Music by ELO. Love that movie. And with that, now time to call it a wrap on the big news roundup. So, hey, have an awesome day today. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, it's pretty basic. Hit that subscribe button right over there. And with that, we're going to dim the lights, very gently fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.